Have you worked on vision in your church, but you're not really seeing the progress that you thought you would by now? Well, today we're going to be talking about some things that may be holding your church back from seeing that vision come to fruition on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malfers Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I am joined by my friend and co-host AJ Matthew. Today we're brought to you by Faith Street. Faith Street is an iOS and Android app that brings congregations together, helps to strengthen people's commitment to the church and to each other, building community by prompting prayer, mindfulness, generosity, reflection, fellowship, and teaching as daily practices. Faith Street is led by a team of church leaders, and so it's an app for churches built by church leaders. Help your people live life together, rally in prayer, participate more consistently, mature spiritually, and give generously. If you'd like to check out this service, go to faithstreet.com/Malfers, Malphurs. Go to faithstreet.com/Malfers. Listeners to the Church Revitalization Podcast get 20% off. So faithstreet.com/Malfers, Malphurs.
The deal.
All right, AJ, today, vision. Vision is, it's a concept that is, I think, not well understood by a lot of folks in the church. I think that some pastors have a good grasp on vision, but something like 85%, the research shows 85% of pastors cannot articulate clearly the vision for their church. That's a high number.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And I think, we see the effects of that in churches really just not living up to their God-given potential and sharing excitement. There's just lots of effects of a lack of vision. Most pastors, they don't feel visionary. I think that maybe they then kind of maybe avoid it, just hope that programs will just make up for it. But I don't know, in my experience, there's always more vision in a pastor than they give themselves credit for. I don't know if you've kind of felt that as well, but I like mining for it.
I think that's the key to that statistic is in how that's phrased. It's not that 85% or only 15% of pastors have a vision. It's that only 15% can articulate it.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like it's on the tip of the tongue kind of thing, but it's not really well expressed. And so what we want to talk about today is what are some of these gaps? What are some of the things that are holding back churches and leaders from having a vision that drives them forward? What we're not going to cover today, although we could spend probably a whole episode on this, AJ, and maybe we should sometime, is the biblical rationale for having a vision in the first place. I think that there's some pushback just initially on the concept. Well, is this something that businesses do? Is this something that churches even ought to do, have a vision? We're going to assume that you clicked on this episode and you're listening to it. You're already buying into the thought or agreeing with us that a vision is a good thing to have. So we're not going to cover that, but we want to talk about what are the things that might be holding you back in your vision. And we have 7 things.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny that you say maybe vision isn't something that they think would be biblical, because you also get this camp that's like strategy is not biblical. So if strategy is not biblical and vision is not biblical, then what is biblical then at that point? They're both biblical.
Just going with the flow. Just
So yeah, there's lots of, I think, misconceptions that hopefully we can help. But vision, really, vision gets married with strategy 100% of the time. You can't just like live in this existential environment in which things magically happen. So, and which is really kind of what we're talking about today is the strategy side of vision. But yeah, our first one is really where you start from, and that's that your church, and again, these are failures, right? So we're going to kind of word them that way, that your vision lacks the size that would require reliance on God. And this is a common mistake is that maybe even in an intentional visioning process, people might start tapping the brakes, saying, "Oh, we could never do that. That's crazy. It would take us years to do that." Or we're a church of 50 people. How could that happen? Probably if those are the brake tapping comments that you have, now you might be on track to some good vision. So those are probably like green flag vision comments that might be being made, not red flag comments being made. So you've got to have something that it's going to take God. Vision is a trust process. It's a faith process. And if it's beyond your abilities, now you're working in God's economy.
Yeah, you're a hiking kind of person. I'm not really. The hiking type's not my favorite. But to me, it is a little bit like standing at the base of a mountain and looking up and going, I could never climb that thing. And it's not an exact analog, because people can climb mountains, right? But it is easy when you're sort of far away from a mountain and you can see it off in the distance to think, I'll never get there. I'll never be able to climb up that. And then just to see that all along the way, you get the provision that you need, you get the energy that you need, you get the supplies that you need or whatever to get up to the top of that. And to accomplish that by God's grace is a great thing. And similarly, when you're at the base of a vision and it feels so far off, it feels crazy, it feels blue sky, it feels nuts. The reality is that you can climb that mountain. It doesn't have to be impossible, because with God, all things are possible. And what right now seems impossible with God is not. So just like you can climb that mountain, you can accomplish that vision, but you're going to need more than just yourself to get there. And that's true.
Yeah.
With vision.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. You need strategies, you need tools, you need endurance, you need a plan.
And prayer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Our second one is that vision paints no picture of the future. And so this will be a good point here, Scott, for us to kind of clarify some terms. Vision, as the name would imply, is a picture. I mean, it's what you can see. Of course, we can't truly see into the future, but we can envision in our mind's eye a different situation, different outcomes and ends. And so let's talk about mission and vision real quickly.
Okay.
In our work here, we have they're very different. They're very closely related, but they have different functions and they've got different processes. And so for these purposes here of you guys listening to the Church Revitalization podcast, the Malfers Group talks about mission first, very specifically in being Great Commission, making and maturing disciples of Jesus. And it being, you might think of as a journey. This is just our function. This is what we do as a church. What we do as believers is to bring the gospel to those who need to hear it and then help them mature in their faith. That's mission, journey. Vision is destination. It's a picture. What does it look like when our church, when we as individual Christians are living a Christian life? What would the future look like for us as a church when we're working together to make and mature disciples? What effect are we having on the world? How is our city? How is our country? How is everybody that we come in contact with going to be changed by us living this out? And we can imagine that. And we can add a lot of specificity to that too, Scott. I mean, we help churches kind of see opportunities in their local context of how they might affect things. And you can even begin to put numbers on that, percentages, or, impact, quantifiable impact that you could have. These are the things that begin to make up vision.
Yeah, very simply, mission asks the question, what is it that we do? And vision is asking the question, where are we going? It'd be like saying, what are we doing? We're going on a road trip. And then vision is where are we going? To what end, to what destination? And your church needs both. You need a clarification of what it is that you do in making and maturing disciples, at the exclusion of other things, at the inherent exclusion of here are the things that we don't do. Here are the things that are not important to us. And then where are we going? To what end? What is the whole point of all this? Where are we going? What do we hope for it to look like when we get there? Just like you would not hop on a plane without knowing where it was going to land, your church should not be engaged in a mission without any sort of idea of where it is you're trying to go.
Yeah.
That would be foolish, right? You wouldn't do that on a plane, and you shouldn't do it with your church. And so if you have no picture of the future, we've talked about this on the podcast, AJ, the church can become depressed organizationally, where people feel like nothing's ever going to change, nothing's ever going to get better, nothing's ever going to improve, and that starts to infect like a disease how everyone operates. And it's interesting to see how just a drop of vision is like a breath of fresh air when people start to see a new possibility, a new future. That also can start to seep out and infect in a good way, I guess.
Right.
It's the antidote to organizational depression.
Yeah. I mean, thinking of a destination, I mean, you could say to a group, we're going to the beach, and everybody can picture a beach. Now, they might not picture the same beach. You might be picturing in your mind, Galveston, Texas, which I have been many times. Probably nobody
one of the world's least beautiful beaches.
Exactly right. If you like sand, if you like waves crashing, any beach will do. If you want to get a specific beach experience, then you might be thinking Key West or the Bahamas or some Caribbean. So you could paint a picture of a beach. You can paint a picture of the Galveston beach where the water's murky. It's not the same experience. Or you could say we're going to the beach where you can see to the bottom. It's crystal clear blue water. There's starfish and colorful tropical fish. They're just very different beaches. So this is what we're talking about, painting a picture of the future. Also, Scott, last week I was doing some hiking and camping with my sons and our trail life troop, and we went to the mountains. We actually went to 2 different mountains. Big Bend, Texas. If you said I'm going to the mountains, great. You might be picturing tall trees, but if you then show up in Big Bend, Texas, you would be very disappointed because it's desert mountains. We also went to New Mexico where there were tall trees. So vision it adds specificity. It enables everybody to see the same picture, and it doesn't leave anybody wondering what the future looks like. And so that's it. We spent a lot of time on this point, but I think it's important.
It is important. That it is one of the biggest mistakes is people go for maybe a catchy one-liner, and I love a one-liner in a vision, but you also need some descriptors. You need some. I often talk about vision as like a well that you can sort of dip down into and pull language out of it. It's less something that you're going to have memorized and more of an image that you have in your mind, and you can dip that bucket down into that well and pull out language that it describes where you want to go. Yeah. So. All right, let's move on to number 3.
Going. Number 3, the vision lacks leadership-wide ownership. And so vision doesn't happen in a singularity environment in which, maybe the pastor or even just like an elder board has vision. This has got to be, it has to encompass hopefully the entire church, but at the very least in development, the collection of leaders in the church. So that it can, part of, the leadership function is communicating to the congregation. That's not just like a Sunday morning sermon communication. This is like everybody through relationships and, through the entirety of the church, groups, Sunday school classes, whatever you might have. But we've got to have this collective ownership of the vision so that it will permeate the church.
Imagine if all 12 of the spies that Moses sends out into Canaan had shared a vision for the future, had really understood God's promise, okay?
Yeah.
And that they had come back from Canaan with the same perspective that Joshua and Caleb did, seeing it less of a mission to figure out should we or should we not, which is how 10 of the spies seem to view it, as like a survey of should we or shouldn't we, right? Whereas Joshua and Caleb seem to go into it. They describe it like God is going to deliver these people into our hands. So that part we don't need to worry about. Now let's just see all the things that those 10 spies AJ saw as negatives.
Mm-hmm.
The people are big. The stuff is big. The grapes are big. Everything's big. It's too big. They could have seen that as plenty.
Mm-hmm.
Look at, we're going to have all this when we enter into the land. But they didn't have ownership of that vision. Really only... I guess Joshua caught it and Caleb caught it and Moses had it. But if you're a Moses in your church and you are the gatekeeper of that vision, that's not good. Moses needed all 12 of those spies to be on board with where he was going, and it was going to, and that would have been enough to influence all the people. Because 10 negative spies was enough to influence the people.
Mm-hmm.
We make the mistake in thinking we've got to win everyone over. We've got to get church-wide buy-in. You don't. You need your key leaders to have ownership of the vision, and that will likely be enough to win over the church. So don't think that you've got to be the gatekeeper. Don't think you have to get buy-in. Buy-in suggests you have something to sell, right? So create ownership within the leaders of the church, and that will be enough to carry it forward.
Yeah, for sure. There's also something to be said in there about when you should be voting on things and when you should be pressing.
Don't get us started on that topic.
All right, let's keep going. Number 4, vision lacks a roadmap forward. So I said this at the top of the show that vision is always paired with strategy, because dreaming big dreams means nothing unless we have a plan of action for moving forward and accomplishing those things. So vision has always got to be translated then into milestones, so that you can move from here to there, from A to Z, and the all the points in between. So this is a really important thing. Part of our process that we do, vision is the 4th of kind of 5 things. And then the 5th being an implementation plan to be able to live that vision out. So you can't leave this. And this would certainly, maybe this is even, I don't know if this is the most common vision failure, Scott, that, vision is created, but then an implementation plan is never created, leaving it hanging. But it can really cripple your church, especially if a lot of effort and emotional work and relational capital has been put into maybe some vision development, and then seeing nothing really change. It can really stunt your growth, then spiritual and physical growth, because you've got a lot of inertia then to overcome. Of whenever things waned and you came to a stop, you've got to try to get that moving again, and people would be really sensitive. So you've got to have that roadmap forward.
I think there's 2 sub mistakes within this one that I tend to see. One is that churches see the visioning work itself as the work, that we did it, mission accomplished. And so there's a sense that, and then nothing changes because they don't see that. No, the work of visioning and articulating it is it's step 1. The metaphor here that I like to use is when you have a stalled car, you've got to give that initial push to get it moving, but then once you're moving, you have to then steer it. Once you can keep pushing it relatively easily, and then you can start to steer it. And the visioning process is that initial push that is hard. It is work, but it's not the whole work. You've not done anything at this point. You've really got to keep going in order to gain momentum. And so, really the real work comes once you're able to steer, because you're going to have to make adjustments and things like that. So people go into the visioning process, they think, oh, we're going to spend a weekend on this, or some organizations you work with, you're going to spend a year on the visioning process, and people by the end are tired because they're going to go, oh, we've spent a year in planning.
Yeah.
But they've not actually done anything. They've just planned for a whole year. That's why we don't do that. And we try to get you out of the planning phase and into implementation as quickly as possible, so you don't waste any energy.
Yeah.
The second mistake I see, AJ, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, but people see their vision, their sort of 5 to 10 year vision, and they think they have to get all that done in the first year. So then they work really hard in the first 3 months, and then they burn out, and they get some good stuff done. I mean, there is good things that happen, but then they burn out after a few months because they tried to do too much. And so we talk about it in terms of just 6 yards of progress. What can you get done this year that you can sustain through the year? And then what would you do the year after that? And so on, so that you don't burn out your church, so that you don't burn out your resources, so that you don't burn out your leadership. So I think that's the mistake. In creating a roadmap forward, don't confuse the visioning process with actual work. It's just planning.
Yeah.
And don't try to be so ambitious in your implementation that you burn yourself out really quickly.
Yep. Good advice. Our fifth point today is that your vision hasn't been changed in 5 to 10 years. So maybe you had some previous vision success, but you might have actually made enough progress where it's starting to look stagnant. So vision has got to be refreshed. And we're not talking about you have to talk about the same vision every 5 to 10 years. You've got to be communicating vision constantly. We're talking about a refresh on it. So because things change, right? Your church, there's no such thing as a static church. Everything is always changing. The world is changing around you. World events affect our lives. Economies change. People change in your church. Leadership changes. So the vision has to change. It doesn't mean that we're like, okay, we were going to do this. We were going to, make 5,000 disciples in 10 years. And we've done 4,500. It doesn't mean, hey, we're going to stop that. We're going to do something completely different. We're going to build, 50 orphanages instead. But you still have to refresh it. You've got to just make sure that this is out in front of us. We're aware of what it is, and maybe adjustments need to be made. And maybe enough people have cycled through your church that we should take a whole fresh look again and recast.
One of the things you like to talk about with pastors, because you've mentioned it to me and you've probably mentioned it on the podcast before, is going back to what were you thinking about when you first started, when you first got hired? I mean, that's often when, as a pastor, your vision is the clearest because your perspective is the most objective. So you see all the opportunities and challenges, and you've not had a chance yet to become jaded, and cynical.
Yeah,
right. And so, I mean, I'll just be honest. I'll be vulnerable here. Like there are dreams and visions and things that I go back to, notes that I have from when I started working with the Malfors group 6 years ago. And I'll look at them, and some of them, AJ, are things that we've done. I go, wow, that's something that I had hoped 6 years ago that we would do, and we've done them. And there are some things I look back on 6 years ago and go, these things still haven't happened yet. And I think in both instances, I don't know that we take sufficient time to recognize that God has accomplished certain things through us, right? But also haven't held ourselves to the fire, our own feet to the fire in other aspects. And so just staying on top of that and remembering, okay, here's what we said we wanted to be, and here's the progress we've made, and celebrating those things, and then also refreshing and going, okay, what's the next 5 years look like? It's so important that you keep those things fresh.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, adding a little bit more specificity to kind of our particular situation here at TMG. I mean, back in that 6-7 year range back, a global vision for our work in revitalizing churches was communicated. I mean, it's written. And I mean, and I worked on a lot of that language, and it was very broad. It was sort of just that, almost like a global impact. And now, even it really accelerating in the last 12 months, we've got a lot of specificity to that now. And so this is a great example of kind of a vision refresh. And we're talking like a 7-year mark now of casting vision for a global impact. And now we have really specific things happening in Europe and Africa and India, and in some specific language groups that would cover, not geographical, but more, culture based. And so that's a great example of the necessity of vision refresh, because we've made progress towards a vision. And now as we get, more into it, we've got to recalibrate for some real specific vision accomplish points. And so I'm glad you brought that up, Scott.
I mean, for me, one of the things was, I felt like it was important that we needed to be an organization where we could give the highest quality sort of concierge level care to churches in a way that doesn't bankrupt them when they're at their lowest moment. Mm-hmm. And lots of the churches that contact us, they're struggling. And then to say, well, here's a process, we can help you, but it's going to cost you so much that you're not going to have any resource margin to implement the things that we're going to be working with you on. That to me felt like kicking someone while they're down. Now, all good intentions on the front end, right? No one was ever trying to take advantage of churches at the Malfers Group. I want to be clear about that. Yeah. But there were structural prohibitions from being able to do that effectively.
It was just an expensive service to deliver.
It's just an expensive service to deliver. That's right. So we've leveraged technology in ways that I was hoping that we would. Mm-hmm. We've, found creative ways to reduce costs. One of which is becoming nonprofit but then also just some structural changes to make it more affordable for churches. And now I feel confident. I feel so confident that we deliver the highest quality, most affordable process, that we put our proposal online for people to download. You don't even have, there's no gatekeeper. You can go to malfersgroup.com and download a sample proposal. We're not trying to hide anything from you guys on pricing, because I believe that what we deliver is as quality as you'll find out there at a fee that any church could afford that needs it. That was something that was important to me, and it's taken years for us to move in that direction. Mm-hmm. But it's happened. So there, not that you guys necessarily care about hearing about the things that we dream about, but it's cool to see that God has sustained us through it, and then to go, okay, what's the next step? And you need to be doing that same thing in your church. What dream did God put in your heart when you started, and what's the dream now moving forward?
That's right.
Sorry, I didn't mean to get stuck there, but I think people should know that we tried to take our own medicine on this.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. All right. Number 6 is that your vision doesn't infect all parts of your church. And so vision can't become something that's created, but then it just sort of sits out there as its own entity, and we're like, oh yeah, wouldn't that be great? Vision as a part of the implementation process of vision and the strategy development to accomplish it, you have to look at everything. And so if there should be no program, there should be no process, there should be no staff person, leadership team, there should be no aspect of your church that is not run through the vision filter. And then discussion and decisions being made on, is this the right and best thing for us to be doing to accomplish our goals? And so that's what we mean by that. Really, the entire church should be affected by this vision, and it has to. Nothing gets to have its own little private space outside of the vision. Everything has got to be involved in it, and all hands on deck.
Yeah, vision can't be your church's side hustle, right? It's the whole enchilada, right? Like that is the mistake. Sometimes churches will do we have a theme this year, our theme is such and such. And so you have everything that your church is doing, and then sort of this condiment on top of everything you normally do. And that's the vision. That's not how that should work. You go, no, this is where we're going. And now everything now has to reorient itself to that direction. So our student ministry, children's ministry, everything that we're doing has to reorient itself to the vision, not we've got everything that we're doing and this is static, and then we're just going to dash on some vision on top. And that's the wrong way to do it, but it's very common. I see a lot of that.
Very common. No doubt about it. Everything has to be on the table. When you're reorienting towards a vision, everything has to be on the table. Everything, everyone becomes vulnerable. Not that everything goes, not that everybody, you're not firing everybody, but you've got to have this open-handedness with the ministries of your church and the church in general, that you're seeking God for a vision, you're discerning it, you're putting your faith in it. Then why would you not give it all over to God? Which, I mean, we should all be living that way anyway. And the church certainly should, but yeah, we can't hold on to things and try to maintain our personal human control over everything. We've got to say, we see what you have for us, God. We see where you want us to go. This is all yours. Help us to get there. Help us to reorient what we're doing so that we accomplish that. So yeah, open your clutched fists on your ministries.
Yeah, there's a natural human inclination to just want to function on autopilot. It's just how God's hardwired us so that we don't expend too many our brains don't expend too many calories, right? Like, it's just how we were created. To the point that there's been studies that have been done, AJ, where if you write out like a quiz and you type it out in just sort of a standard font, people pass it at a particular percentage. Like, maybe I'm just making up the numbers here, but 70% pass. If they use a kind of a funky font that's harder to read, the people actually tend to perform better on the quiz, because people actually have to stop.
You have to focus
and read every word.
That's funny.
And so they're thinking, it's engaging a different part of their brain. And so it's a significant increase. It's a noticeable increase in performance. Likewise, in your church, if you basically say, hey, well, we can function on autopilot in these 5 areas, and then we're just going to sprinkle this on, you're going to get a certain level of effectiveness that's going to be okay, but not great. But if you take the time for your organization to have to think it through and apply a lens and go, okay, should we do this or should we not do this? Then you're going to get a better result, because you actually have to think. You can't let the organization slip into that sort of autopilot that's natural for humans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Number 7, your vision points inward at the expense of missional impact. And so this is a common thing that churches end up sort of looking inward on things that they can do that maybe kind of seem missional, but end up just sort of serving themselves. And I think an example of this, Scott, is building projects or just facilities in general, or property. And so maybe this is a good example of what we're talking about, that it might be a capital campaign. They're like, we need to build a gym, or we need to build, a whole new church. And instead of vision driving that, like, we've got a vision and we're making progress on it, or we want to impact the community in such a way as a facility would be a strategy for us to do that. And even then, it's a fine line, because it's real easy to dream about a building like, wow, that would be so beautiful, because our stuff is so junky now, and it would be so nice to be here on Sunday mornings in a new facility. That's not vision. That's
right.
That's comfort. That's personal preference. And so, these are the kinds of things that you've got to separate vision and vision kingdom impact from strategy. And in 99.9% of the time, any kind of building project is a strategy. It should be seen as a strategy for vision, but it's usually not the case, right, Scott?
Yeah. I've had a number of churches I've worked with that the best way to describe it is it's like a building project hangover. It has been seen so much as the end point.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. We're building up to this building project, and then you get to the building project, and then people go, well, what now? What do we do now? Rather than seeing that building project as simply a means to a higher, more external ends, so that when that building project is done, now it's the launching point for the thing you were wanting to do ultimately anyway, versus it being the end unto itself. And so that's the mistake with a building project, is that very often it is seen as the ends. rather than a means to an end.
Right.
And so, yeah,
It makes me.
I see. Go ahead.
You've probably seen this too. I've driven by pieces of property around the city for years that have had the sign up, future home of Mount Zion Baptist Church. And, 5, 6, 10 years. And you got to think, is that all their vision is? How come they're not there yet? Why, they set their sights on something years ago and they still haven't gotten there. Is it because the building itself was the vision and there's just really nothing to motivate that? So yeah. If hopefully your church is not one that's had a future home of why there, why that site, was that right. Site chosen out of a specific strategy and a vision of doing something great right there? Or did you happen to get a good deal on some property 10 years ago and you're like, someday we'll be there? I don't know.
Yeah.
But, I think this is just another sort of example of maybe the divorce between vision and strategy.
There's this saying, I'm going to probably butcher it, I'm going to pull a George W. Bush and butcher the saying probably. But remember that classic, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice. Well, you're not going to fool me again. But the saying I'm thinking of is hard times produce hard men produce good times produce soft people, soft people produce hard times. That's the cycle, right?
Yeah, sounds like the cycle, the Israel cycle,
Deuteronomic cycle. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it's similar, but it is this idea, though. I see it in churches. You have this visionary time leads to visionary people who then do these great projects, which leads to people who kind of become complacent, which leads to things being difficult, which leads to then hopefully either death or an opportunity then for people to rise to the occasion. And what I see very often in churches that had just finished a building project or some great internal thing is then this sense of, well, we're good. We can kind of coast, we can just ride the wave of this. And then what tends to happen then is things really start to fall apart. And so you can sidestep that entire problem if you don't allow something that should be a means be an ends, and always be looking towards the outside, the external, the mission field. And if your church is blessed to have great resources to do that, then see it as that. See it as a resource. I've worked with a number of churches. I don't have one in particular in mind. I've got several actually. That they kind of hem and haw a little bit, AJ. Like, I don't know what should we be focusing on? And I walk outside their doors and they're surrounded by a neighborhood. There's like a school that's 2 blocks down the street. They've got great road frontage or whatever. They're really well positioned in the community. What are you talking about? What should you be doing? Look at all your neighbors. You have thousands of neighbors that drive past you every week, and you're like, gosh, we can't reach people. Really? I think that maybe you don't want to, maybe, because you'd have to get out of this beautiful building you built in order to do so.
Yeah.
So,
man,
don't think that the building project is going to solve your problems. It just creates its own set of problems.
It really does. It seriously breaks my heart. I know it does for you too, Scott, to see untapped potential withering on the vine in churches all over the world. And so we would love to help you do that. You can find out more at malfersgroup.com. We would love to hear from you, have a conversation, talk about where you're at, and help you figure out what God has for you in the future. And we've talked a lot today about the marriage of vision and strategy. And one of those things will be a tool that Faith Street provides in being able to communicate vision clearly to your people and be able to keep that in front of them so that they understand how they participate in it and how the changes in their lives can affect the changes in your church and in the world around them. So certainly go over to our friends at faithstreet.com, at faithstreet.com. Throw a /Malphurs on the end, MALPHURS, and your church could get 20% off in utilizing this tool to help build community in your church and communicate clearly the things that your church wants to do in the world. Could be a really awesome thing.
That's right.
Thanks for joining us today. This has been episode 94 of the Church Revitalization Podcast, and you can read today's show notes at malfirsgroup.com/94. As Scott said, we're also over there on the YouTube. You can.
I want to say something about that.
Yeah.
Real fast.
Okay.
I think that we get good feedback on the podcast, and if you're looking for, hey, what's something that we could do to encourage our staff? Take an episode like this on vision and throw. You don't have to. If you can at least see our faces, if you go to the YouTube channel and watch it with your board, watch it with your staff, pull up the show notes and kind of pause as we go to each one of these points and have a discussion. But at least you have some visual to go along with the audio. You're very unlikely to just plug up a podcast episode and listen to it with your team, but you can pull it up on YouTube. So do that. Go to I think we're youtube.com/the Malfirst Group. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. youtube.com/the Malfirst Group. You have to go. You have to put the in there.
A free resource. Invite us into your staff meeting at no cost to you, and you don't even have to get on our calendar. So you can just pull it right up. I think that's an awesome idea, Scott, to have a team really look at this together. I bet you'd have some pretty interesting discussion.
I know that you would. Yeah. I mean, go through each of these and go, which of these 7 things are we guilty of doing? And that would make for a great, I think, team building discussion. Yeah. Awesome. So go to youtube.com/the Malfirst Group and you'll find us. Subscribe there. And all of the episodes, I think, at least any of the more recent ones, there's video versions of them on there.
Most certainly from the last year. Lots of content out there.
Yep.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for being with us. We love you. We're praying for your church. Can't wait to see you back next week.